like a war of sorts, and not war, but like a contest. See who can come with the most clever way to create ionic, hotspots and do something interesting with it. So that's kind of how that evolved. So there's one argument that could say that possibly spraying these mists up in the upper atmosphere could be part of some kind of HARP-like experiment. That's one plausible thing I could think of that might make sense, but I don't know. I'm just guessing at that point.
Well, that was a really candid dissertation. I appreciate that.
Well, I'll just tell you what I know and what I don't know.
No, it was a candid dissertation. I appreciate that. I really do.
All right.
Yeah, no, truly. So what would happen if the Chinese had this and they wanted to transform the entire topography of the Gobi Desert? I mean, that would be...
Well, yeah, and here's a thought for you. And by the way, I do believe that weather wars are happening. I have actual photographs here that I've gotten myself from various sources that actually show. Now, here's how this would really work. If you were going to, for instance, use a storm as a offensive weapon, that's kind of how you might see it. You're not going to create a storm from scratch. That's ridiculous. The amount of energy required is huge. There's no way to create it synthetically. However, if there's already a storm in progress, and all you're trying to do is move it around a little bit, that's actually fairly easy to do. If you had a concentrated enough, sort of, again, the right frequency and the right thermal pattern, you could sort of lower the story. You could sort of push it around a little bit. Because really what a storm thrives on is differential in temperature. If you have warm water versus cold atmosphere, then you have the right combination of events and the storm forms, and there you are. And so storms tend to follow these thermal patterns as they occur in the ocean, and then due to atmospherics, when you come to a landmass, then of course the land is a different temperature and the storm begins to dissipate. But if the idea was you wanted to create damage, like for instance Katrina, I mean, just think about this for a minute. Here you had our major seaport, you had this huge facility that's where all of our oil facilities are, et cetera, refineries and so on. All of a sudden you had this killer storm that sort of made this like left turn right there, like on target. Some folks had theorized maybe that was an experiment. Maybe that was something to sort of show that this could be done. Well, as it turns out, and you may know about this already, but several years ago, in the eastern part of the world, they're called cyclones. And various parts of Malaysia, of course, had some really bad cyclones. And so at one point, a group of Russian scientists, again, these former Soviet scientists from the military labs, actually made an offer to Malaysia and said, look, we know that you're having a lot of trouble with these cyclones causing harm to your seaports and so forth. For a fee, we will change the course of a cyclone and steer it out to sea so it won't hurt your facilities. And people thought about this, and it actually was almost like to the edge of signing deals. But then the reason it was not approved was not because it couldn't be done scientifically, but because of liability potential. Because as you probably all know, weather is the most chaotic system that we know of. It has the most variables, and by far is the most complex system of interdependent variables that exist that we can possibly try to model or understand. And so even if you manage to steer a cyclone away from a place where it caused damage, the side effects or the consequences of steering a storm around might cause even more damage elsewhere in the world. And so assurance companies, these are companies who assure insurance companies, the people that underwrite, large bank loans, and sort of the major economies of the world rely on these sort of large insurance systems, like AIG, for instance, one of the big insurance companies that failed, right?
Right.
That's what they do. They assure for these kind of things. So they said, look, there's no way we could analyze the risk potential of underwriting something like this, and therefore we're not going to go along with it. So even though scientifically, all parties agreed it was an interesting idea, it was because of liability reasons that they decided not to go through with it. But the fact that it was even made as an offer and that, the various technical folks were ready to go, it kind of showed this was a possible thing. This was several years ago. So more recently, last year, in Beijing, there was a moment where the sky turned black. In the middle of the day, it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, sky turned black. There was a horrific hailstorm. I mean, horrific hailstorm. And
Didn't they have snow? Didn't they have snow, Charles?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello?
Didn't they have snow?
I'm sorry, excuse me, one more time, please?
Didn't they have snow in Beijing?
Well, they had snow, but the thing was, the sky turned black, and hail, you have to understand what hail is. I'm sorry. Hail is not snow. Hail is water that's recycled vertically up and down inside these huge cumulus clouds. And if you ever see these like big, they're called anvils, these big black clouds that are sort of flat on top, and then they go up in many thousands of feet into the atmosphere. The reason they're shaped that way is because you have a vertical cyclone inside where the winds are stirring around in this vertical vortex, and so you have chunks of ice, and they fall a certain distance, and they get back up, and they get more ice wrapped around them. So when they get hailstones falling out of the air, especially if they're large, that means they have an incredibly powerful vertical cyclone going on, up to 20,000 feet. And so here you had the city turning black, and then about 200 miles away you had this incredible hailstone, like one of the largest hailstones ever witnessed in human history. And several thousand people were killed. I mean, it was houses were flattened and there were deaths. I mean, it was a pretty big deal. And China tried to cover it up, but it was, kind of a major thing. The thing that I thought was kind of interesting was, if you recall when the Olympics were happening in China, China published in the People's Daily, and I still have the article here on my computer somewhere, and they very proudly said, we are going to prevent rain and clouds from disturbing our summer games. And they bragged about the fact they had enough weather control equipment to guarantee perfect weather for the games. This was China's through their People's Daily as a public statement. So that kind of suggests, gee whiz, that, and by the way, I've got some space shuttle photographs, and I'll send you one in the email if you wish, and you can actually see there's a perfect hurricane going on, eye of the hurricane, and right at the very edge of the hurricane there's a square, like a rectangular-shaped chunk of clouds, like a hole being cut through the clouds. A perfect textbook signature of a collimated radio beam, doing something with a cloud formation. So, excuse me. So, in other words, this is kind of a done deal. So, one of the things that kind of scares me, and by the way, two other things I should mention. There was several events here in the United States, one in Minnesota, by the way, right up near the Canadian border, where the jet stream came down to the ground, and millions of trees were flattened. I mean, torn up, roots up and everything. 200-mile-an-hour winds scouring across the surface and disappeared again. The theory is that this is one of our tests, and there had been an earlier event in Wisconsin, and it was out in the wheat fields, but it did cause some damage, and there was a lot of insurance claims, and so they decided to do the next experiment out in the middle of nowhere in the Minnesota-Canadian border area, so there wouldn't be any, liability damage. So there's evidence that we were trying some of this stuff, and there's lots of evidence that China is doing this stuff, and obviously the Russians were doing this as a business maneuver. So it's kind of obvious that weather manipulation is a doable deliverable, as it were. It's a commodity. Now, could that be part of a potential offensive, strategic sort of asset to play with in the future? Yeah, certainly could be. Could some of the climate change we're witnessing be an artifact of some of these tinkerings? Could be. In other words, I'm willing to go as far as climate change is quite real. Yes, of course it is. Is carbon part of it? Yes. But I think there's other parts of it that may or may not be for public knowledge, and that could be part of that puzzle.
Well, that's a pretty interesting revelation, and I'm on that bus with you because what ultimately, right? What is the ultimate power to control the environment of the planet? I mean, this is theoretically.
Well, here's where it gets more interesting. If you're going to cause damage to an economy, and you have to remember back in the days of the Cold War, we did a lot of stuff to the Soviet Union, and they tried to do stuff to us, not just with rockets and that kind of thing, but we did things like, for instance, we knew that they were stealing our software. So there's one example. There's a company here in the Silicon Valley, which I won't name, but they're one of the major producers of embedded controllers for refineries and for controlling valves and pipelines, that kind of thing. And we knew that the Soviets were sort of sneaking around trying to get their hands. So we set up a deal. I didn't set this up, but I just know that people had arranged this. They allowed some of these chips to get stolen with this firmware on the chips. And they brought it back to the Soviet Union because they were building this giant pipeline out of Azerbaijan, or I think it was somewhere in that area. And they had this, it was a natural gas pipeline with this huge sort of, facility with tanks and everything. Well, apparently the software had bugs, which we knew about. They used the software, and the largest non-nuclear explosion ever recorded in history was when that facility blew up, and we saw it with our satellites as a result of the purposeful sabotage that we caused by letting them steal these chips. I mean, this kind of stuff happens. So in a way, if you're going to, economic warfare is really the name of the game in terms of superpowers battling each other. It's not going to be with, ships and tanks and that kind of thing. It's really going to be through much more subtle means, through incurred debt, as we were talking about earlier, and through changing the playing cards, as it were, in terms of who has the upper hand in terms of the world economy. And so one way to do that would be to cause crop failures or to drastically change the patterns of weather over certain areas where it might affect your potential economic health in the future, your export potential, that kind of thing. So could there be an argument that says that there's been this ongoing battle by invoking climate change in certain ways that would cause, economic harm? And so if you want to walk that path, and I'm just saying as a theoretical idea, could the chemtrails be a way to prevent that from happening? In other words, if we knew that things were kind of funny going on. Could we be using some kind of particulate matter in the upper atmosphere to lessen the effect of these alterations of the jet stream, that kind of thing? That's a possible argument. It's not one that I know for a fact, but it's a possible argument.
Well, that certainly might be the most altruistic argument, or a rationalization for the use of chemtrails. But it remains to be seen.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, for sure. So we're winding down here on our time, and I just want to say that I have thoroughly enjoyed having you on the show, Charles. And
well, I certainly do too.
One of the cool things about not just about what I'm doing here, but about life in general is that I first got to know you in 1996, 1997, and you and I went through a number of interesting experiences with.
I think the word interesting will sum it up quite well. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and and driving down the coast to L.A. and stuff like that, and the thing that I always really appreciated about you is just you, and being able to connect with you and have this really kind of free-flowing interchange of ideas and communication. And it's great to know that even though you and I have not talked, really, it's been almost 10 years now. Am I right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, something like that. Time flies and having a good time, I guess. Who knows?
But we still have this portal of dialogue between us.
Absolutely.
And I really appreciate that. And we're not that far apart, and I hope that you and I could rendezvous somewhere up in the gourmet ghetto one of these days for a cup of coffee, like the old days. Absolutely. And and talk just off the record, as it were. So let's get some websites for you, Charles, and
sure.
Find where people can find out more about your work and maybe where you're speaking in the not so distant future.
Absolutely. So I have several, but the one that's relevant in this context would be Historian of the Future, all one word. I'll say it again: historianofthefuture.com or .org, either one.
Okay. And any upcoming speaking dates or?
Well, actually, I just gave a talk in Los Angeles about 3 or 4 weeks ago. There's some others, but they're not confirmed yet, so I don't want to give them up. But I do put them up there once I have confirmed. So it's a work in progress.
Okay, good. Then just go to Charles's website, find out what he's up to, where he's speaking.
Yeah.
And, where in the world is Charles Ostman? So.
Okay.
Yeah, Charles, thank you so much again for being with me and
thank you.
That sat through our static storm, and hopefully I'd have you back on in a couple months and get an update as to where the world is headed in this velocity cannon, this linear accelerator that we're all seem to be joined at the hip together in.
Sounds good. Take care, and we'll talk soon.
All right, you take care, Charles.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So that was Charles Ostman, and I hope that the static is not as bad as it's been reported to be on the other end of these conversations. And if there has been the static, then I hope that you've been able to sit through it and weather the storm, because there's some great information coming through. Charles is a wonderful resource, and you can always go to his website, Historian of the Future, and find out what he's up to and where things are headed. Charles is a weather vane. He is a canary in the coal mine, and what Charles shared with us tonight, he's like an iceberg. He probably shared the upper 20%. He shared the upper 20% of the iceberg, and there's a lot more beneath the surface that Charles knows about and understands and is working on that is not for discussion in the public. So when he does come out and he does share, it is really a blessing and a gift, and I really thank him for coming on. So next week we have Eric Sagelsgaard, who is the author of the 27s. It is a astrological look at many people who have departed before the age of 28. There's a big astrological angle, there's a big cultural angle, and I look forward to talking with Eric, and we'll talk more about that on Wednesday when I join you for Navigating the Astrological Matrix. My name is Robert Phoenix. You've been listening to Free Association Radio. Until next week, bye.